Hi everyone, welcome back to Best Recapped Movie. The Mechanic is a beautiful movie starring Jason Statham and directed by Simon West in 2011. Be careful, spoilers ahead. At the beginning of the movie, a group of Jorge Lara, one of the bosses of the drug mafia, beat people. He enters his residence with his bodyguards and decides to spend his time swimming in the pool. While swimming, he sees a clock on the bottom of the pool and goes towards it when he is suddenly suffocated by a person in the water and dies. The killer moves Jorge Lara's hands and feet in the water so his men do not notice his death. After some time, one of the servants sees him and screams, and on the other hand, his killer is none other than Arthur Bishop. While his men pull him out and still hope for his survival, Arthur takes off his robes and sneaks away. He reaches himself on the bridge, and from there, when a boat is passing, he jumps into the water and moves behind the boat. After that, he goes to his forest house near the lake. There, Arthur explains his job, where he is assigned to kill a certain number of people. In some missions, the target must be killed in a way that seems random. Jorge Lara was one of these targets whose news Arthur sees on news sites. To receive his reward for killing Jorge Lara, Arthur meets with his employer and, of course, his oldest friend, Harry. Harry pays Arthur's wages and compliments him on the example of how he executes orders like a machine.
You're a goddamn machine.
Arthur asks about his son Stephen, and Harry says he was fired from the company he was employed for indiscipline and beating. After that, he goes to a dance bar and sees his prostitute Sarah dancing there. After he sleeps with her, he leaves some money on the table for her, and Sarah says, "Don't you want to tell me your name?"
Arthur.
Then, by searching on the organization's website, he finds out that Harry has posted an ad for a mechanic. After knowing its authenticity, this worries him. He arranges a meeting with his other employer, Dean, who is Harry's partner. Dean tells Arthur about a failed mission in South Africa, where several assassins were killed, the details of which are known only to Dean and Harry. Dean shows Arthur a photo of one of the people named Sebastian, who was involved in the failed mission and was shot dead. He accuses Harry of being an informant and tells Arthur that you have 48 hours to kill him or our men will. Dean says that Harry, now nearing the end of his life, has become a burned nut and needs to be removed. Arthur hesitates and says, "Let me talk to him," but Dean says there is no way back for Harry. At night, Harry thinks about killing his old friend on the balcony. After that, Harry, working in his room, receives a call from Arthur. Arthur tells him that Dean will kill him and that he needs to get out of the building as soon as possible. Harry takes some documents and his gun and tries to get to the parking lot with Arthur's advice from behind the phone. Harry, who uses a wheelchair, has a hard time going down the stairs, and after reaching the parking lot, he meets his car, which Arthur staged. He admits that he has been tricked, and to complete the scene with his gun, which has written on it that you have to plan to achieve victory. He shoots a few shots at his car and then gives his gun to Arthur, saying that this will at least show who resisted death and did not die like a coward. Arthur says, "Why didn't you shoot me?" Harry says, "If you don't, someone else will kill me eventually." Arthur kills him with one shot. At his funeral, he meets his son Steve. After a short conversation, Steve asks Arthur to take him home. At his house, he tells Arthur that maybe I can make him proud of me and gives him one of his father's photos. After Arthur leaves, Steve gets drunk and shoots things in the house. He goes to a neighborhood where thieves live, and one of the gangsters points his gun at him to steal his car. Steve immediately takes his gun and beats him. Arthur arrives and stops him at the last moment when he decides to kill that thief. Tomorrow morning we see Arthur installing a mechanical piece in the garage. Then Steve stops him while he is shopping. He tells him that he knows about his work for his father and asks him to train him as a coach. At first, Arthur says no, but at night, when he looks at the picture of Harry, his mentor and old friend, he decides to call Steve and prepare him for the missions. He takes Steve to a pet shop. After a short conversation, Steve says, "You know nothing about me." At the same time, Arthur briefly describes his biography of him to show his information. They buy a dog there, and Arthur asks Steve to spend some time with that dog so that the dog gets used to him and takes him to a cafe and sits by the window for 3 weeks. He gives him the necessary training, such as how to shoot and the required information. He praises Arthur's car in the garage and says he would like to ride it.
When are we gonna go for a ride?
Still, Arthur says that he will never be allowed to do so, and of course, when he approaches the gramophone of him at Arthur's house, Arthur stops him again. During one of his missions, he takes Steve with him to understand the mission closely. Arthur strangles one of those involved in arms smuggling from behind and pretends that he strangled himself while masturbating. When they return home, he shows Steve the evidence about the killed person. Arthur gives Steve a mission in the same cafe he is going to. A person named Burke is the one who is intended to be killed. And Steve can approach him since he spends a lot of time in the cafe. Burke has 2 weaknesses: he likes small dogs, and on the other hand, he likes boys. Arthur tells Steve to use these 2 weaknesses so he can kill him. He gives Steve a lethal liquid to pour into his drink at the bar and kills him. Still, when they go to the bar, Steve remembers Arthur's previous mission and decides to change. Burke asks Steve to go to his house, and despite Arthur's advice about not going to his house, he ends up doing it. In the room and on the bed, Steve puts his belt around Burke's neck to strangle him, but he's strong and won't die that easily. After a grueling fight, Steve kills him with a screwdriver and an iron rod. After he returns home, Arthur gives him the first aid kit.
I told you to make it clean.
After Burke is killed, Arthur and Steve go to a bar for a good time. There, Sarah will be with Arthur again, and on the other hand, Steve will meet a girl named Kelly. Seeing Steve's scars, Kelly says she wishes someone would bully her like this, and then they sleep together. When Arthur leaves her, Sarah thanks Arthur with Steve's dog in her arms and tells him she will name dogs Arthur. Arthur receives a new package from Dean for his new mission. Opening the package, he calls Dean with the phone inside. At first, he criticizes Arthur because Steve did his previous mission. Still, Arthur says, "I didn't have a promise or appointment with you. I had one with Harry." Dean then talks to Arthur about the new mission. He tells Arthur about the importance of this issue, and of course, he says his salary is double. Arthur also accepts it. He must kill a who named Vaughn and needs Steve's help. He shares the documents and videos with Steve. Vaughn has already made millions of dollars from his churches and religious programs on television and created a new religion. They decide to kill him through 12 cc's of adrenaline. Vaughn enters the hotel with his bodyguards to conduct an interview. He meets the reporters. On the other hand, Arthur and Steve enter the hotel. They monitor Vaughn's room and install cameras on the windows of his room from outside and monitor him. When Vaughn sleeps, they go to the secret passage behind his room. They see him through the air conditioning channel camera. When they are ready to attack him, suddenly, he enters the room with one of his companions. He prepares himself to inject ketamine and gets drunk by injecting it. Arthur says that ketamine destroys the effect of adrenaline, and he will not die. For this reason, they decide to strangle him as soon as he is alone. The phone under Vaughn's hand rings, and they immediately start the mission and enter the room. While Vaughn is not in a normal state, Arthur grabs his mouth and asks Steve to shove the camera down his throat so that he suffocates and dies. They do this and return to their place when one of his people enters. Ralph from Vaughn's people notices his death when suddenly a bead is released from under Steve's foot and falls into the room through the ventilation duct. Hearing the sound of the bead, Ralph asks his men to check the back of the mirror and remove the mirror. Before this, Steve shoots him, and a fight begins between them. Finally, Arthur and Steve reach down from the roof of the hotel and leave the hotel without anyone suspecting them. Arthur tells Steve they should get out of the country as soon as possible, and the two separate for now. Dean watches the news about the failure of the operation on television news. At the airport, Arthur is eating coffee when his eyes fall on Sebastian, the same person who Dean showed Arthur the picture of his death. Arthur follows him until he gets on the bus. Arthur asks him about the Cape Town operation. Sebastian says there were 5 of them, and Dean asked him to kill the other 4 and told him to hide for a while. Also, Harry learns that Dean decides to kill him. Sebastian tells Arthur if he doesn't mind killing Harry because Dean easily plays him and plays tricks on him. After saying this, he attacks Arthur, and they fight each other. After a hard fight, Arthur throws him out of the bus, and Sebastian dies when the car runs over him. Arthur wants to go to his hideout in the forest by boat, but Dean's men search for Arthur there. Arthur surprises them and kills them all. Then he calls him on the phone of one of the Dean's people. In this case, they threaten each other with death. On the way to Steve's house, he calls him. Since Arthur is brilliant, he realizes he is under Dean's people's supervision. He tells him that a gun is ready to shoot next to the sofa with which he can kill the people who caught him. After finishing the conversation, Steve takes the gun and kills everyone. After he gets home, he asks Steve to take the necessary items from the warehouse. Steve finds his father's gun among the tools and realizes that Arthur is his father's killer. On the other hand, Arthur finds the address of one of the people close to Dean named Finch. Along the way, Steve, with tears in his eyes, asks questions about those killed by Arthur to understand his father's feelings at the time of his death without him knowing. They arrive at Finch's house. First, Steve shoots him in the leg, and then Arthur pressures him through his daughter and wife to reveal Dean's address to him. After they reach Dean's hotel, Arthur calls Dean. First, Dean offers him money, and after seeing Arthur threaten him, Dean also threatens him with death. In this case, Arthur says he knows where he is and won't have a chance to do this. Dean is afraid to find out that Arthur has entered the building and immediately decides to leave the building with his bodyguards. Arthur, a brilliant person, foresees this and attacks them with the cooperation of Steve. Arthur neutralizes all of Dean's bodyguards, leaving only 2 to protect Dean. Steve blows up one of them, and the other is Dean's car. Arthur comes at him with a truck, and the driver is killed. The only person left alive is Dean, who is injured and tries to get out of the car. Arthur and Steve don't give him this permission and shoot him continuously. After that, on their way, Steve asks Arthur if they will continue working together, and Arthur says it depends on you. Then Arthur notices that Harry's gun is in pocket of Steve, and he probably notices that Arthur killed his father. Then they stop for gas, and Steve asks if he needs anything, and Arthur says no. When refueling, he leaves gasoline on the part of the car and spills it on the ground. Then he moves away from the car, and Arthur sees him in the mirror as he moves away from the car. Suddenly, Steve shoots at the car, and the car explodes. After that, he goes to Arthur's house and sits on the sofa. He looks at the gramophone and decides to play some music on it. Then he goes to the garage, starts the car Arthur had worked on for 2 years, and dreams of driving with a few starters. After he leaves the house, he sees a piece of paper next to his chair, on which it is written, "Steve, if you're reading this letter, the moment of your death has come, from Bishop." While Steve is laughing, the car explodes, and at the same time, also the gramophone starts burning. Continuous explosions destroy the house. The police, investigating the scene of the car explosion at the gas station, noticed that a person jumped out of the car before it exploded. After that, we see Arthur, who was alive, getting into the car and moving on the road. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.